Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. Pope Leo XIV has recently formally declared St. John Henry Newman, who was canonized only in 2019 by Pope Francis, a doctor of the Catholic Church, a recognition given only to 37 other saints in Catholicism's over 2,000-year history. This places Newman among great figures like St. Augustine, St. Gregory the Great, St. Jerome, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Teresa de Avila, St. Catherine of Siena, and the Little Flower, St. Therese of Lisieux. What is the significance of giving St. John Henry Newman, an Englishman, an Anglican convert to Catholicism who was born over 200 years ago, this title? What is it about Newman's approach to communicating the faith that earned him this great honor? And why now? Equally important, how can contemporary evangelists draw inspiration from his work to proclaim the gospel in a drastically different world, religiously and morally, from Newman's 19th century Victorian England? Here to discuss Newman's importance for both the past and the future of the church, and to share how Newman has deeply influenced his own evangelical work, is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop, welcome back to the studio.
Matt, always good to be here.
So today we're celebrating St. John Henry Newman being named a doctor of the church. It's going to officially take place on November 1st.
Yeah.
A lot to celebrate here. Before we get into the substance of today's topic, what have you been up to recently?
Well, as we record these words, I'm just back from the Good News Conference down in Orlando, which is a wonderful gathering sponsored by Corporate Travel and Word on Fire. And Jonathan Rumi was there, and Father Mike Schmitz was there, and many others. And I said Mass and gave a presentation the first night. So that was a lot of fun. We've had those, I think, the last 5 years now. And then today, right after we finish recording, I'm going to a farm about 40 minutes south of here at a place called Adams, right near the Iowa border. Uh-huh. You know, people forget my diocese, you say Minnesota, they think right away like Duluth or, way up north. We're actually more like northern Iowa. I'm the southernmost 20 counties of Minnesota. So really a lot of my diocese is rolling farm country. Think Iowa slightly north. So I'm going to one of these farms, and this farmer invited me. I was involved in a planting last spring at one of the farms near Winona. Uh-huh. He said, no, you got to really experience the harvesting. Otherwise, you won't get it. So I'm going today to drive the combine and harvest some corn and all that.
What a great scene.
And it is great because most of my diocese is rural, and I drive through it a lot, and it's mostly farmers. And I respect them a lot and love to learn more about their life.
I don't think people realize how much you have to drive as bishop. How long does it take from one side of your diocese to the other?
4 hours end to end. And so I'm in Rochester, which is toward the eastern end of the diocese. But, about a month ago, I was way out west a lot in my diocese, and that's about a 3-hour drive. But, I don't mind. I have books on tape and listen to rock and roll. And, so I don't really, there's something nice about the private time actually in the car.
I appreciate that as well. So let's turn now to our topic, St. John Henry Newman being named a doctor of the church by Pope Leo XIV. Before we look at some of the major themes in Newman's thought that led to him receiving this honor, Bishop, can you give us a sense of what it means to be a doctor of the church? What's the process? Yeah. What does that honor mean?
Well, doctor just means teacher in Latin, right? And these are people that are recognized as teachers of the church in a kind of supreme sense. Mm-hmm. So, all priests and bishops are teachers. We're all doctors in that sort of general sense. But there's certain people that emerge in the history of the church as really definitive teachers, as inescapably important figures. So think Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Irenaeus, right. Chrysostom, a whole series of people that they're indispensable in teaching the faith. Well, Newman, for a lot of us, has long been recognized as one of those figures. Now, I'll say this, when I first started teaching a course in John Henry Newman many years ago at Mundelein Seminary, I used to tell the guys, all right, I got 2 wishes. I want Newman to be canonized, and I want Newman to be named a doctor of the church.
Oh, look at this.
So I'm 2 for 2. Now, that was back in 1997, probably. I started teaching that course. So I'm very, very happy. I was privileged to be in Rome for the canonization ceremony of Newman.
That was relatively recent.
Yeah, 2019, right before COVID. Uh-huh. And now doctor of the church. So it just means that the church should pay very special attention to the teaching of this man.
Yeah, only 38 in the history
of
the church.
Yeah.
So I didn't know this until we started doing a little research for the show, but all doctors of the church are saints.
Yeah, right.
But not all saints are doctors. So what
Right.
is that distinction there?
Well, a saint is someone who's of heroic virtue, of great holiness, but maybe not a distinguished teacher of the church. Like a Saint Francis, maybe the greatest of the saints, but wouldn't be recognized as a great teacher of the church. So a saint, though, who does teach in this definitive way can be recognized as a doctor. I think it's a beautiful description, and it fits Newman particularly well, I think. I used to tell the students, he's a touchstone for me, the way Aquinas is. But then for a more contemporary figure, Newman is a touchstone. I go back to him all the time. Like if you're looking for the sane perspective on something and the left and right are battling away and you think, okay, what would Newman say? And it usually is something of extraordinary balance and wisdom.
Right. Well, give us a sense of a brief overview of the main biographical points of our life that are most important for understanding how he becomes a doctor eventually of the church.
Yeah, he's a fascinating life, and there have been tons of biographies of Newman. One feature is Newman's life covers pretty much the entire span of the 19th century. He was born in 1801, dies 1890. So he lives to be a very old man, covers almost the whole 19th century. And his conversion in 1845 is right smack in the middle of his own life. So it divides his life perfectly. So Newman is an Anglican, and he tells us about an experience when he was 15 where he came to a sense of being justified by grace through faith. So it was kind of a Protestant spirituality. And he conceived this deep love for Christian dogma, Christian doctrine. That brought him eventually to Oxford, where he studied, and Oxford becomes his place, just as Paris maybe was Aquinas' place. Oxford was Newman's. And he studies there and then becomes a fellow at Oxford, at one of the great teachers and professors. And in that capacity, he launches in his 30s the so-called Oxford movement, an attempt to reform Anglicanism in a more Catholicizing direction, if I can state it kind of simply. It made Newman a celebrity in England. It also made him an object of great opprobrium because many people saw him as betraying the Anglican establishment. And keep in mind, especially in the 19th century, it was not just a religion in England. It was like the whole of British life was conditioned by Anglicanism. So if you're moving it in a more Catholic direction, it was seen as deeply subversive by a lot of people in England. So Newman is a celebrity figure, and then midlife in his 40s, he does indeed become a Roman Catholic, which led a lot of his critics to say, see, we knew this all along, and moved a lot of Catholics to say, wait a minute, this former Protestant minister is now one of us. So the result was both sides of the divide were suspicious of Newman. He becomes the rector of the newly formed Catholic University in Ireland. We'll talk about that a bit, but it was not really a success in terms of practicalities. He edits magazines and various things. One of the marks of Newman's life, by his own admission, was that he kind of failed at most things. He felt he was a failure, that most of his projects kind of came, to naught. But as a Catholic, he tries to kind of bolster the Catholic Church in England. Long story short, but toward the end of his life, in his mid-60s into his 70s, he kind of reemerges as a beloved figure with the publication of the Apologia Pro Vita Sua, which is his great intellectual autobiography. First book of Newman that I ever read when I was a young kid. And that kind of restores him to public prominence. And then under Leo the 13th, and that connection is really interesting, that Leo the 14th has made Newman so central, because Leo the 13th makes him a cardinal. And mind you, over a lot of objections. Read Marvin O'Connell, this marvelous Catholic Church historian. What went into Newman becoming a cardinal? It was not a walk in the park. There were a lot of people, both in England and in Rome, that were dead set against it. But Leo the 13th said, he is il mio cardinale. He's my cardinal. And makes Newman a cardinal. And then he lives another 10 years before his death in 1890. So it was, in its own way, a kind of adventurous life. Not that he left a study or a chapel very often, but it was a kind of intellectually and culturally adventurous life.
Nowadays we tend to think of someone moving from one form of Christianity to another as fairly pedestrian.
Right.
But that was certainly not the case for Newman. What risk was he really taking socially and professionally by doing that?
I'm glad you bring that up. It's very important to clarify because you're right. Today, if someone said, you know what, I've decided I've been a very high church Anglican, I'm now becoming Roman Catholic. Most people say, great. Yeah, good for you. Or even, I was a evangelical Protestant. Now I'm a Roman Catholic. Oh, well, good for you. Glad you found your path. But no, in Newman's time, you have the famous 39 articles, which come out of the Reformation, and they were kind of the defining qualities of the Anglican Church, and they were the foundation, as I said, not just of the church, but of society. You had to accept those articles to be a member of Parliament, to be in the government, to be a professor at a university. So when Newman said, I'm becoming a Roman Catholic, and he was an Oxford professor at the time, it meant his life was over. It meant the place he loved, Oxford, he had to leave. It meant the job he had, which he loved, he had to abandon. It was an incredibly courageous decision to make, especially at midlife. Let's say you were just beginning your career. You're a young university student, and you make that move. Okay, you have time to kind of adjust. But you're in the middle of your life, the middle of your career. You're a celebrity, right, within the Anglican structure, and you abandon all of that. I thought of this man when I was in Rome for his canonization. They always put a big picture of the saint on the facade of St. Peter's. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking up at the picture of Newman. All I could think of was when Newman came to Rome, 1846, I guess it would have been, he felt lost. He felt, okay, I'm here because I'm studying for the Catholic priesthood now. Again, ironically, this high-level theologian, but had to go through some elementary classes, right? And he eventually gets ordained a Catholic priest. But he feels like I'm out of step in the classroom. He went to visit the Pope at the time. That was Pius IX, with whom he had kind of a rocky relationship. And the custom of the time was that you kiss the Pope's foot, right? So Newman said on the way down to kiss the Pope's foot, he knocked his head on the Pope's knee. And he said, it kind of summed up my relationship with Pius IX. But my point is he felt kind of, all right, I came of age in this one world. I'm now kind of transitioning to another, and I'm not quite at home here. I'm not quite at home there. And that was the mark of much of the second half of Newman's life. And it was because he made this great break with his Anglican background.
It's great courage. So let's now turn to some of the major insights in Newman's thought that led to him being named a doctor. We could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this. We'll only look at a handful. The first one is one of his greatest contributions to theology is his idea of the development of doctrine, the development of doctrine. Bishop, help us to understand what he means by that term.
Yeah, it's a master idea, Newman, and it got him in trouble in his own time because a lot of people didn't understand him. It still gets him in trouble when it's construed in a sort of relativistic way. Here's, I think, what he means. Newman said, ideas don't exist on the printed page. They exist in the play of lively minds. So I have an idea, right? Let's say an idea of the incarnation. God becomes a human. What do I do with that idea? It doesn't just sit dumbly in my mind. Rather, my mind, lively, turns it over, looks at different aspects, wonders about it, asks questions about it. Think of a diamond. You throw it up in the air and it catches the light in a particular way and you catch it. Now throw it up again. It catches the light in different ways and you catch it. The idea unfolds in a lively mind. All right, now I take that idea and now you come along and I say, hey, I'm thinking about the incarnation. Here's what I think about it. I throw the idea to you. What do? Well, now, same thing. You turn it over, wonder about it, question it. I question you about it. You question me about it. It's like a tennis match. So I hit the ball to you with a certain spin and directionality, which compels you now to respond with your own spin and directionality. And as the rally goes on, the two of us are kind of conditioning each other. The game is playing us in a way, even as we play the game, that whole dynamic. Yeah. Well, that's Newman's idea of an idea. They're not just like dumbly present in the empty theater of the mind. They're unfolding as minds consider them, right? They are developing, which means unfolding their various aspects. One of his lines I love, he says, the content of a real idea is equivalent to the sum total of its possible aspects.
Wow.
That's a packed line. A real idea. Look, even this is like Husserl too. I've argued that Husserl is influenced by Newman, or they're similar in Husserl's phenomenology. So a simple thing like this glass. Well, I'm looking at it right from my angle. I'm seeing one profile of it. As I turn it, I'm seeing fresh profiles of it. My mind is Husserl now. It's intuiting the essence of it. It's trying to put these together in a way where I say the glass has these various aspects. As I'm doing this, you're looking at it too. You're seeing it from fresh angles and perspectives. Well, this is a stupid, simple object, a glass, right? Now, consider an idea as richly complex as the incarnation. It takes time and through the discipline of conversation for that idea fully to unfold its possible aspects. In that sense, ideas develop. Now, here's where we got to be very careful, because most people hear, development of ideas. That means that they're always just evolving and becoming something else.
Right.
No, the key for Newman is they're becoming more fully themselves. They're unfolding more and more aspects of themselves. It doesn't mean an idea goes back on itself. It undermines itself. Like if I were to say, all right, the creed says, I believe in one God. Well, I guess it might develop in a way where, no, actually there are two gods. Or no, I think there are three gods. No, you never undo what you know. But all the aspects of that teaching, what does it mean to say God is one? Well, that's going to unfold through the play of lively minds and across space and time. Now think of the great theological tradition. So St. Paul throws an idea to Justin the Martyr, who throws it to Origen, who throws it to Augustine, who throws it to Gregory the Great, who throws it to Aquinas, who throws it to John Henry Newman, who throws it to us. And now here we are discussing it. That's the way it happens. And Newman says, I love this, it's like the way a seed unfolds to become a great tree. The seed looks very little like the unfolded tree, but nevertheless, it's a development. The source of the Mississippi, not too far from where we are now, up in Lake Itasca, right, northern Minnesota, it's one thing, little source of the Mississippi. Now go to the mouth of the Mississippi in New Orleans.
Right.
And well, what's happened is the river has deepened and broadened and taken on tributaries, and it's become something new as it's developed over space and time. Well, ideas are like that. So that's what he means. It's a very positive, and it's the opposite, seems to me, of any kind of relativism or subjectivism. Newman was passionately committed to the truth and felt that we can know objective truth, but truth opens up. That's development of doctrine.
You've already laid the foundation to answer this question, but just to get a little more development on his sense of the development of doctrine, what are the safeguards that his own thought puts in place to prevent this kind of misuse that you've identified?
Yeah, well, a very important distinction. Newman, yes, indeed, talks about development. He also talks about corruption. Mm-hmm. So something develops if it's authentically unfolding its own deepest meaning. That's a legitimate development. Now think of a child in the womb, a child born, a child unfolding and developing over time. That's a development. A corruption would be something that moves against the integrity of the organism. Let's say there's a branch of a tree that dies. Well, what do you do with that? Well, you cut that branch off. That branch now becomes inimical to the flourishing of the tree. In a similar way, can ideas become corrupt? Yeah, Newman was a great student of the Church Fathers, and he knew that the Church Fathers often battled heresy. What's a heresy? It's an errant development, you might say. It's a devolution. It's a corruption of doctrine. Now, how do we know that? Because it's undermining the integrity of the doctrine, not unfolding it, making it more authentically itself. It's undermining its integrity. He also has, we don't have time to go through all, but he has 7 marks of legitimate development, the signs of a legitimate development as opposed to corruption. One of which is this: conservative action upon its past. See, and what he means there is ideas never go back on themselves. If you say, hey, I've got a development of the idea of God, which involves there being two gods. No. ipso facto, that's a corruption because it's now repugnant to what the idea was. On the other hand, if I were to say, hey, here's a theological perspective that unfolds the meaning. I'll give you an example. Years ago when I read Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity for the first time, he has a section on the opening of the creed, right? Credo in unum Deum, I believe in one God. And he says, that's a reiteration of the Shema prayer of Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is the Lord alone, which means it holds off idolatry. I remember, I've been a Catholic all my life and said the creed, but I'd never thought about that. Like, yeah, that's an anti-idolatry principle. Well, ever since that moment, whenever I've taught the creed, written about the creed, I've made that point. To my mind, that was a development of doctrine, right? Look at Vatican II, especially teaching on the church. Is it repugnant to what came before in our ecclesiology? No. It's bringing out features and aspects. Here's another one in Newman. Sometimes a development is the full realization of something that was hinted at in the past but not fully unfolded. Let's say you find in the writings of, Chrysostom, there's a reference to something, and it didn't take off. It didn't unfold. But then many centuries later, someone picks that up and says, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. And now its time has come, right? That's a sign for Newman of, okay, that was a legitimate development. He calls that, is it antecedent action upon its past, something like that, where it's anticipated in its past. I'm giving just a hint here of the criteria that distinguish between legitimate development and corruption.
Is it accurate to say that contradictions are always ruled out? So if you're seeing a contradiction, then that's sort of by definition a corruption.
Yeah, you can never simply gainsay what was said. You can't say this settled truth is now unsettled. No, see, in a way, a real development makes you more confident in the truth that you already knew, not less confident. Yeah. You say like, now I get it even more deeply what that means. There's a famous essay, was it Ronner himself that wrote it, called Chalcedon, Beginning and End. So Chalcedon, the famous council, that settled an issue of Christology. He's the hypostatic union of two natures in one person without mixing, mingling, and confusion. All right. Was Chalcedon an end? Yeah. It ended something. It definitively decided something. You can't go back on that. You can't say, I don't think he is the hypostatic unit. But it's end, but also beginning, meaning, sure, theology goes on. Theology keeps thinking. We keep turning over that idea of Chalcedon, not undermining it, but unfolding it, see? So it's both beginning and end. Fair enough. I think that's close to Newman.
Pope Leo recently made a comment during a homily that's received a lot of attention among Catholic circles. He said, I'm quoting him here, no one possesses the whole truth. We must humbly seek it and seek it together.
Yeah, right. Now, it's very interesting. A lot of what we've been saying, that's entirely a Newman sentiment. Okay. Because he's not saying, who knows the truth? And truth is just, you got yours, I got mine, and no one knows, and it could become something. Again, the quote is, no one possesses the, what does it say again?
The whole truth.
The whole truth. See, that's Newman.
That's the qualifier, right?
And we know that Leo XIV is very enamored of Newman, and that's a very Newman instinct. That's true. See, I can't possibly have the whole truth, meaning the sum total of its possible aspects. Look, even the Aquinas, there's a great quote in Aquinas. It was in a more popular talk he gave on the Creed, where he said, the philosopher does not even know the essence of a fly. Now, you can read and think, Thomas Aquinas said that? It sounds like some kind of, Nietzschean relativism or something. No. Even the little fly is known totally only by God who created it, God who gave it its intelligibility. We can get some sense of it, right? But even a little tiny fly, we don't know its essence totally. So in the same way, no one of us or no era of the church knows the whole truth, let's say, of the incarnation or of the Trinity or grace or whatever. Now, it doesn't mean there's no truth or it's all relative. No. We know truth and there's settled doctrine in all kinds of areas, but the wholeness of it belongs to God. Right. And we approach it in this life asymptotically, right? Mm-hmm. We approach it never quite reaching wholeness, but through the play of lively minds and the disciplined conversation of the church. What was the second part? Because it was also Newman-esque.
We must humbly,
yeah.
emphasis on humbly, seek it and seek it together.
Yes. See, and that's the part that's Newman-esque to me. There's no, this is Descartes, there's no retreating into the heated room and and coming up with the cogito. We don't, Catholics don't like the cogito. We like the cogitamus, right?
That's right.
We think.
It's beautiful.
We don't like the retreat into privacy and interiority. We like the lively conversation. And so that's really good. See, that humbly, I want to say, look, I don't know the fullness of the incarnation, so I got to read Augustine and Aquinas, and I got to read the Bible, and I got to talk to you, and I've got to talk to my students. I got to listen to questions about it, and only in that process do I asymptotically approach the sum total of all of its aspects. So I would take Pope Leo there. It's a really good example. It's a very Newman-esque way to talk about it. It's not relativistic at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Very clearly the case. So, Bishop, help us to understand how all of this relates that you've just laid out to perhaps St. John Henry Newman's most famous quote, and you know it well. It's, "To live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often."
Right. And it's a lovely quote, and he's one of the great masters of English, and people love that. But when it becomes like a little poster on the wall, I'm afraid what it turns into is some kind of 1970s, hey, I'm always changing, and don't tie me down. And that's not John Henry Newman. It belongs precisely, and people don't get this, but in this epistemological context we're talking about. An idea is a living thing. See, that's his point. Ideas don't exist on the printed page. They exist in the play of lively minds. They're alive. To live is to change, meaning to develop. The Mississippi is a living river because it's developing. It's deepening, broadening, taking things on, etc. A tree is living in the measure that it's taking in new nutrients, sending out new branches and new roots and so on. An idea is living because it's developing and unfolding the play of lively minds. To be perfect, that means having displayed the sum total of your possible aspects. You got to change often. Yeah. You have to develop and develop and develop and develop. See? So it's not some license for anything goesism. That's precisely the wrong way to read that. And I would put it first in the epistemological framework, backed up by organic images, right, of the river and the tree and so on. But the idea is the unfolding of ideas. Make a further point about this, and people forget this very often. Whom is Newman here in polemics against? He's in polemics against Protestant critics of Catholicism who would say, look at this Catholic Church, the liturgy and vestments and incense, and you got the saints, and you got relics, and you got Mary, and you got the Pope, and all this foo-foo. What is all this? Yeah. Shouldn't we cut all that away? Isn't that all corruption? See, and Newman's answer is, there are corruptions indeed, and they should be cut away. Think of heresies that should be cut away and pruned. But he began to see all those things that as an Anglican he was wary of as, no, those are developments of doctrine. Those are developments of the idea of Christianity across space and time. So it's a very pro-Catholic. See, it's read as a kind of liberal idea, hey, change, everything's open to change. It was defending, if you want to put it this way, a very conservative view that Catholicism represents not a corruption but a development.
I've also heard you frame it in these terms that even conservation requires change in the sense of repelling threats.
Right. Now, that's the famous Chesterton example, right? Of if you want to keep the fence post white, what's the worst thing you can do? Leave it alone. It'll be black before you know it.
Right.
You want to keep it white, you got to paint it all the time. You got to be very attentive to what's going on around it. Or you want to keep this plant alive, well, you have to do a lot of pruning. I'm not a gardener, but I know some people who are. And the amount of work involved in attending to the growth of a plant, well, that's the same thing, see, with ideas in the life of the church. That's why we have theologians and why there are debates and why we, because we're like gardeners of this living garden of Christian truth. See, Newman was so good because he avoids these simplistic categories, of left and right, and I preserve, I'm against. You do all of the above if you're interested in the life of an idea or an institution.
Still within the area of epistemology, Newman also famously describes what he calls the illative sense
Yeah.
of the mind's assent to propositions, including faith propositions. So,
Yeah.
Bishop, give us an idea of what that means, especially in relationship to absolute rational certainty on the one hand and total skepticism on the other.
It's, again, one of his master ideas. Also got him in a lot of trouble because sort of the standard conservative scholastics of the time were very wary of this idea of Newman. But it's born, I think, of his English background. And, he critical of them in some ways, but he was devoted to Locke and the British empiricists and all that. And I think had a certain suspicion of a high continental sort of, Hegelianism and all that. There was a commonsensical quality to Newman. The illative sense says that when I assent to something, a mysterious moment, and it is mysterious when you think about it, when you say, yeah, I agree with that. That's true. Well, what goes into that? Well, Newman certainly felt argument. He would have called that formal inference, went into it. Make an argument, syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, there's a classic syllogism. And we do reason that way, often without knowing it. But he said syllogisms are open at both ends, meaning they're not in themselves definitive. Because we can always find exceptions to whatever generality we want to make in that first premise. We can always find exceptions to it. Therefore, we can always find exceptions most likely to the conclusion. There are certain mathematical truths that are known with a kind of luminous clarity. Okay. And certain very clear syllogisms, sure. But talk about life now, the decisions you make and the assents that you give. Rarely is it simply a matter of formal ratiocination. Rarely is it just, I got an argument. Boom, boom, boom. No, Newman says, in fact, we assent because of a whole congeries of influences, hunches, intuitions, experiences, examples, models. Do you ever have this? It's happened in my life when you're wrestling with something. And do I believe that? I don't know. Until someone comes along whom I really respect, and he believes it. Okay, I believe it now. I'm simplifying it. But and Newman says that we can rarely know these things with clarity. A lot of it's unconscious. He wouldn't have used that language, but like Freud is right after him. But he wouldn't have used unconscious, but I think he knew about that.
Right.
There are elements that go into assent that are non-rational, that participate to varying degrees in the rational, that are matters of body and heart and emotion and experience as much as mind, and that they all contribute to this mysterious moment of assent. He was, in that way, a kind of anti-rationalist. He didn't like a rationalism that wanted to – see, modernity is marked by that.
Right.
From Descartes on, it's marked by let's find the absolute rational ground. It's true of Hegel and Kant, Newman has too much of the English in him, and I think in a healthy way here, to say, no, our assent is a much more complex business. Now, it's very important, and I've used it for years in my own work. When you're evangelizing, I want to convince you that Jesus Christ is Lord and you should give your life to him, or I want to convince you that God exists. Do I use arguments? Yeah, I have. Go back to my writings and videos and stuff, and I've used formal arguments for some of these things. But I would never think in a million years that that's sufficient to my purpose, right? Hunch, intuition, something beautiful that participates in it, a person who holds it, a saint who lives out of it. All of those things can lead the mind. And see, the illative sense, Newman invented that word from ferro, ferre, tuli, latus in Latin, meaning to carry. The illative sense carries you from this congeries of influences, none of which is in itself definitive, but all of them together tending in one direction leads the mind to say, yes, I accept that, And I think it's one of the great contributions Newman makes to our epistemology. He fully reverences the rational, but there's more than rationality involved in assent.
No, I know our audience will want your commentary on this famous quote as well, related to everything that you've already been explaining. Newman says, 10,000 difficulties do not make a single doubt.
Yeah, one of his famous lines. And there I think he just means, a difficulty about a belief is, how is that possible? I don't quite get that. No, I don't understand that yet, or that puzzles me. Think here of the Blessed Mother, How's it possible? I know not man. That's not a doubt. That's a difficulty, if you want, where she's saying, I don't understand how that's possible. Difficulties in that sense, theology is grounded in them. A difficulty is, use that maybe overworked image, but it's the little grit inside the oyster around which the pearl forms, right? It's what kind of bugs you and leads you to seek an answer. A doubt is the affirmation that you don't believe something. I don't believe that to be true. I don't hold that to be true. That's a much more definitive statement. A difficulty, even 1,000 of them, might give rise to the development of doctrine, right? Well, wait a minute. What do you mean he's the hypostatic unity of two natures in one person? I don't get that. What do you mean by that? See, that's a difficulty. Fine. That leads you to a deeper understanding. Or the Trinity. So I say God is both three and one. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. So what's the distinction? Well, the three refer to subsistent relations within the unity of the essence. Unpack that for me. Those are difficulties, right, that are leading to a fuller development of doctrine. If I were to say, no, it's a bunch of nonsense, I don't believe that. I doubt that. That's a doubt. Mm-hmm. So even 1,000 difficulties don't make a doubt.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about, Bishop, but to conclude, and then we'll move to our listener question. You've already given one piece of advice for evangelists in general, how we can draw on Newman's thought. Let's speak specifically to our brothers and sisters in the UK, in England, in this rapidly changing religious landscape that's happening in real time. How can they draw on the great St. John Henry Newman as they navigate these waters?
No, that's a fair question. And I think in all the ways we've talked about, but to claim him boldly as their own. I used to tell my students, I taught the whole tradition from the Bible through the fathers and the medieval figures. And I say, here's the first really major theologian who speaks our language. And it's true, isn't it?
Right. He's writing in English.
He's writing in English. And he's one of the great stylists. The famous line from James Joyce when someone said to him, I want to shake the hand of the greatest stylist in English. And Joyce said, no. The greatest stylist in English is a cardinal of the true church.
That's right.
Meaning Newman. So, to appreciate the writing of Newman, I told my students, you have to read him out loud, especially his sermons. You should read them aloud because he's a master of the periodic sentence, and the rhythm and flow and balance of his sentences is Ciceronian, and he knew Cicero very well, and he would have learned that, but no one does it better in English than Newman. So, I would claim him, and also his style of thinking is English. And so those of us, I'm Irish background, but who come from that more Anglo-Saxon Irish background, I think recognize something in Newman. He's not given to sort of Hegelian flights of speculation. He's not Heideggerian that way. There's a certain reticence about the continental style. There's a groundedness, which is why a lot of people compare him to William James. And there are some interesting overlaps. And James would be a younger contemporary of Newman. So I think Americans, Anglos, Irish will notice something in Newman's writing, obviously, but also his style of thinking.
Let's now turn to our listener question. Today we have a priest, Father Jason from Texas, asking for your advice, Bishop, on how to give better homilies.
What suggestions do you have for priests to improve our homily preparation? Do you have any favorite commentaries, recommended books on crafting homilies, or your own thoughts on preparation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I've written a lot about that and spoken about homilies. Quick answer would be read the Church Fathers. I was deeply influenced by especially Origen and Augustine, the greatest of the Eastern Fathers, greatest of the Western Fathers. And they were marvelous preachers. And I learned a lot about preaching from the two of them. Also, I would say, and YouTube makes this possible, is watch great preachers. So in terms of content, the fathers are my favorite, but also watch and listen to the style of great preachers. You can, tune into Fulton Sheen. You can watch him. I learned a lot from great Protestant preachers when I was a young guy listening to like a Charles Stanley. I really admired a lot as a preacher. So go on YouTube and look up preachers that you admire. Look, Jimmy Swaggart, he got in trouble later in his life, but Jimmy was an outstanding preacher. I learned a lot from watching him. Not that I preached like him really, but I learned a lot from him. Billy Graham, marvelous to watch, and I learned a lot from him. So I'd say the Church Fathers, and then get on the internet and watch great preachers as they do their work.
Well, thank you so much, Father Jason, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question for a future Word on Fire show episode, please visit askbishopbarron.com, askbishopbarron.com. We always love to hear from you. And I also want to let everybody know that if you want more of Bishop Barron on St. John Henry Newman, we have a full course of his on the Word on Fire Institute platform. Well, thanks so much, Bishop. Many gems as usual.
My pleasure. Good being with you, Matt.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.